The Straits of Hormuz is about 20% of the world's exports, period, full stop, of everything. It is not just oil and fuel. It is every single thing you buy and sell. It makes it a $500 million deal to get cargo out of the Gulf right now. It is insanely expensive right now.
If you're the commander of the world's navy or world's economy now, what would you do in the Straits of Hormuz?
You either go full-on scorched earth, you conquer South Iran, or I think you can't. You need to go to diplomacy. So effectively, the war with Iran completely freed up all of Russia's oil trade as an unintended consequence, 100%, and double their revenue. Second thing the U.S. have done, and is fully unprecedented, Michael, in history. Well, this is becoming very maritime for everybody, huh?
The world is about this. This is affecting everybody in the world right now. Welcome back to another episode of Invested. I am back with my friend and Aleph entrepreneur, Ami Daniel, who is joining us from London. Hey, Ami.
Good morning. It's good to be back.
Ami is joining us for the second time on Invested. So this is a first, meaning this is our first second-time guest on Invested. And I highly recommend you go back and listen to the first episode I recorded with Ami, which dealt with things that he did and other members of the Israeli high-tech community did on October 7th in the morning. It is a wartime chronicle. And unfortunately, we're back with another wartime chronicle. But this time, we're actually going to dig into Ami's real expertise, which is not saving people from safe rooms in Gaza envelope, but actually maritime and maritime activity, and particularly what's going on in the Straits of Hormuz. Ami is the CEO and co-founder of Windward, which is a maritime AI company, perhaps the world's leading maritime AI company. It was public on the AIM exchange. Since then was purchased by a private equity firm. Ami, welcome back to Invested.
It's great to be back. Thank you very much. And I think we have a lot to talk about today.
Ami, before we start dumping into numbers, give us your 10,000-foot observation about, one, the importance of the Straits of Hormuz to the current activity, two, what you see going on right now in the Straits of Hormuz on today's date, which is the 22nd of March, 2026.
10:20 a.m. GMT, because it changes by the hour. Sure. So if I take a step back, people think about the Straits of Hormuz as just crude, but I think it's actually a crude view of the Straits of Hormuz, pun intended. The Straits of Hormuz is about 20% of the world's exports, period, full stop, of everything. Okay. About 15% of containerized trade from east-west trade goes through Jabal Ali. That's locked down right now because there's no containerized trade exports, which, by the way, makes the air freight price go whatever 6, 7, 8 times up. It depends which route. Obviously, about 20% of the world's crude, 20% of the world's LNG, LPG, which is liquefied petroleum gas. Fertilizers, Qatar exports about 50% of the world fertilizers, which is used obviously to make food for all of us. Cooking oil is about 20% as well from the Gulf. Steel, the Emirates is a big steel manufacturer. So that's used for building buildings, actually. So I would really say that the right way to look at it is really almost an assault on global economy and global trade. There is no single country, there is no single industry, there is no single action, purchase, trade that is not severely impacted by the closing of the Straits of Hormuz. It is not just oil and fuel. It is every single thing you buy and sell.
Okay, before we get into the details, I think it's important to lay out, number one, which countries surround the Straits of Hormuz. So on one side of the Straits, there is Iran. And then on the other side, you have Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Oman.
Correct.
And for those who don't know, could you please describe what the Straits of Hormuz looks like? Because I think this is important. And hopefully in the show notes, I'll put up a map.
It's about 25 or whatever miles wide, but really it's two different routes, east to west and west to east. And really, so you shouldn't look at this as a strait. You should look at it's two different lanes. And at their minimum, I think they're a few miles wide. So it's very, very narrow. It's also very shallow. And it's the entrance in and out from the Gulf, really. And by the way, this has been, I would say, on the board for about 40 years. For 40 years, Iran said we'll close the Straits of Hormuz, and the West allegedly was preparing, let's talk about that, to open the Straits of Hormuz. But it was fully in the cards, which is why Saudi has this pipeline into Yanbu, to the west, which is about 5 to 7 million barrels. We need to talk about that. But effectively, they control the economy of these countries as well as the exports from these countries. I think I've heard assessments that Qatar and Bahrain might, their GDP might decrease by 5 to 10% each this year. Decrease, not increase, right? So it's really a full on, I think, assault on their economy as well.
And if the whole world knew about the Straits of Hormuz and the problem that and Iran's threat to close them, why do you think nobody did anything about it?
I think first of all, let's talk about what does it mean to close them, because I've heard some news about insurance companies being at fault. I think that's BS. Really, you can buy today. You can fully buy insurance to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Period. Full stop. I think what we're seeing is exactly what the Houthis did in the Red Sea. I wrote this on my LinkedIn account 2.5 weeks ago, and unfortunately, I was right. The Houthis actually what they asked for is ransom, to go through the Red Sea. Really, after the whole U.S. Operation there, you could actually pass through the Red Sea, provided you would pay cash to the Houthis, about $500,000 to $2 million per passage. It was a well-kept secret in the shipping industry, but kind of everybody knew. And I predicted that that's what we're going to see with Iran. I think that's what we're going to see with Iran. I think that's what we're seeing with Iran. So what happens is they allegedly may or may not have mined the Straits of Hormuz. And by the way, mines is a very dirty business. The last time we saw this, I think, was in Iran-Iraq War. I don't think I've ever heard really about maritime mines used since then. Maybe a bit in Ukraine, Russia, but not really. So because you need a choke point, and really in Ukraine, Russia, you really don't have really that much choke points in the Black Sea. So allegedly, you can mine it. So you need to use mine sweepers, which are not made out of metal. They're made out of fiberglass or wood, so that they can not explode, obviously. But that could take 50 to 90 days to do that. That's why it took them in Iraq War. They could be attacked with underwater unmanned surface vehicles, or midget submarines, which would be launched from tunnels or something like that at the other end of Hormuz Strait, and drones. Drones, by the way, are not that difficult for a tanker because these tankers are very big. They're double hulled since the Exxon Valdez event in 1989, 1990 in Antarctica. So tankers are really like thick right now. So drones, if you look at the last 3 years of drones attacks on ships, they don't drown them really. Only unmanned surface vehicles or mines or midget submarines. So after that, how do you open the Straits of Hormuz? First of all, you need to clear the path. Today, what we're seeing, Michael, in the last 5 days, that's news, is ships only transiting very close to the Iranian coastline, 2 or 3 miles from Iran. So we think, as far as we know, that they're paying to do that, about a couple $1 million per passage, and it's done fully in collaboration with Iran. Obviously, they're not American or Israeli or UK vessels, right? They go to other countries. And we're not seeing almost the bottom 2/3 of the straits being used, allegedly because of mines. How do you open it? It's a good question. You need to deny every one of these threats, plus ballistic missiles, plus shore-to-sea missiles, consistently in different means to allow passage. It is a very, very difficult mission. I personally doubt it can be done without boots on the ground and taking the southern islands of the straits. That's my honest opinion.
And the southern islands include Kashim Island and perhaps then Karj Island also, right?
I don't know if you need a Carter Island to allow the Straits of Hormuz to pass. You need Kashim Islands for sure. You need to look at the straits, look at what's north of it, all the islands north of it. That's what you need to take care of, at the very least. Plus maybe escorts, but again, you put a navy ship in a strait, it loses its advantage. Okay, the whole radars tech thing, it becomes a very physical thing which can be swarmed by many vessels. That is not easy.
All right, so let's just unpack this 1 second. So you said insurance is available. Insurance
Yeah.
is available at what price? What multiple of the previous price?
So probably 4 or 5 times, maybe 10 times. But again, in the grand scheme of things of crude, if you look at $120 a barrel ish, okay, let's say VLCC, very large crude carrier, takes 2 million barrels. So 2 times 120 is $240 million of the cargo. The
Mhm.
freight has gone up to 700, 800K a day from 80. So the freight is done 10 times. So, and you pay freight for all the voyage, not just for Straits of Hormuz. So 30 days voyage. So it's not 30 times 80, which is, let's call it 24 million. It's 30 times 800, which is 240 million, right? Plus $240 million for the crude. It makes it a $500 million deal to get cargo out of the Gulf right now, plus $2 million of insurance. So, when you think about it that way, okay, 2 million on half a billion, but it is insanely expensive right now. It is like multiples and multiples, and I think that's part of the challenge, right? It's all the ecosystem, it's not just the insurance.
And you also talked about these unmanned, surface, maritime vehicles that I assume if I put that into, regular parlance is something like suicide speedboats. Is that the way to think about
Yep.
that?
Yeah, by the way, the Ukrainians are using very successful in Russia. We know it's in terms of asymmetric warfare, the Ukrainians are killing it. They're crushing it with that, and you can see Navy vessels go, up in smokes. So it's the West obviously is knows about it, but even if you know about it, it's not that easy.
Yeah, you're a maritime intelligence firm. Do you have an assessment of how many suicide speedboats the Iranians have?
Nobody knows. I don't know.
Nobody
But
knows.
it could be hundreds though. But I don't know exactly what the US took out, but it didn't take out. But these things are very small and easy to hide. So again, I don't it's not easy to do this from the air, okay? Especially not because Iran is huge. So they can come out from different spots and they've been preparing for this for a while. So I'm not sure it's that easy.
When you look at the coastline there, right? So there's, what is it, 1,400 kilometers of coast?
Yeah, something like
It's
that.
a
It's
big,
big.
and they've been attacking all the way out to Oman, which is all the way out, outside the Straits, of Hormuz. So,
They also attack into Yanbu in the Red Sea, right? So it's way beyond the Straits. But yeah,
what was that? We haven't gotten to the Red Sea yet. Sit tight on the,
yeah.
Red Sea. So the Iranians are now, or have been firing also outside of the Straits around Oman, as well. How does that impact the ability to, quote, unquote, "open the straits" or, bring naval vessels closer to actually exercise some power?
So in our analysis, we see that actually the bunkering area, marine fueling area of Fujairah, east of UAE and just in the border of Oman, has been almost totally evacuated. Bunkering ship fueling prices have gone three, four, 5 times up. Depends which bunker fuel, because that area has been evacuated because of these attacks on Oman in Fujairah. So that impacts a lot because it means the threatened area where you need to start escorting ships is much bigger. So it's not really the straits. It is 300 miles south of the Straits and 300 miles or 400 miles west and northwest of the Straits, right? To do that with a ship, like let's call it 600, 700 miles, could take you a week, 2 weeks to do it carefully. And then these convoys need to go back and forth for a week or two. So it's a lot.
You mentioned that the Houthis, when they threatened basically ships entering the Red Sea, coming around the Horn of Africa at Bab el-Mandeb, basically collected ransom. Ransom is a way basically to get cash into your economy, right? And it's
100%.
no secret that the Iranians need cash. So like the great pirates of old, they are holding up, ships in the global economy basically for cash. And
Yeah.
therefore,
By the way, the Somalis, Somali pirates did it as well. The people would like drop $5 million of cash into the Somali kidnap hijacked ships, and they would do the same. So it's the Somali trick adopted by the Houthis, now adopted by the Iranians. Yeah,
okay, also in your most recent report, you say that there's, 686 cargo and tanker vessels in the Arabian Gulf, 292 tankers and 394 cargo. They're stuck there?
hmm yep.
They're stuck there because they can't pass out, obviously, from
Can't
where they.
can MSC have declared end of voyage, which is like a legal thing that you announce because your containers are stuck there. Maersk have done the same. All containers trade isn't going in and out at all. All these ships are stuck. Yes.
What does end of voyage mean?
In a voyage means it basically cancels your contract with your customer. So if you ship something on a Maersk ship, you have a contract. You need to deliver some to some place. Think about it like as a force majeure. So just like Qatar announced force majeure on LNG deals and LPG deals because they're unable to obviously fulfill their long-term commitments to Japan or China or Korea or the buyers of this gas. Equally, the container vessels there and the container liners aren't able to fulfill their commitments to. It could be, by the way, you or me with a container that we're importing from China. It could be, it could be anyone. It's like hundreds of thousands of containers that are stuck there for sure.
Do we have any idea what's in these tankers or containers? I assume the tankers we assume are laden with oil or LNG.
It's crude, it's oil, it's LNG, it's LPG, it's cooking oil, it's steel, it's iron ore, it's soy, it's wheat, it's everything. And containers could be anything. Yeah, it could be cables. It could be, interestingly enough, yesterday I met a guy here in London and on the football field, and he told me that his business has gone to a halt. He has like a small business. He sells whatever internal football fields for private homes. He can't make them because he can't get the materials from Asia because air freight has gone 10 times up and he has cargo stuck in the Gulf. So what I'm saying is it impacts every single one in the world. This is a good example. It impacts like a small business owner that wants to. He tells me, "Listen, I just want to make a living. What does this have to do with me?" So yes,
In your report also, it says that LPG loadings in the Gulf over the past 7 days, uh, were 1.5 million.
yep,
And the top 3 destinations are India, China, and Indonesia. Now, just to put that in context, the export from the Gulf, it's the lowest in the past 2 weeks.
yep. Since the last 12 months, yes.
Just explain this to our listeners what this means, both in fact and for everybody else.
Sure. So LPG is liquefied petroleum gas. It's another form of energy, effectively. It's if you think about crude needs to be refined to make oil products. It's which is like fuel and jet fuel and so forth. You have LNG, liquefied natural gas, new LPG, liquefied petroleum gas. It's different forms of energy. I think we're seeing India, China, Indonesia still importing a bit, but this is another example of the global energy exports being ground to a halt by the closing of the Straits of Hormuz. It's another sector. And I had breakfast with one of my customers here, which is a shipbroker CEO, and he told me, "Listen, Ami, there's almost no deals happening at all of any shipments to and from the Gulf, also in the future right now." So it's not that just the experts alone now. This guy, their job is like the future deals, right? 2 to 6 weeks in the future. There's almost nothing being booked right now because there's so much uncertainty. I think that's an important point. Even let's say the Straits of Hormuz open in 2 weeks in a magical way. Okay, somebody waves their wand and everything is open. It's all good. I think it takes weeks to build back up. The LNG exports, sorry, the LNG production have been halted significantly. The in crude, when you manufacture crude, you need to store it somewhere. Iraq, Kuwait, UAE, and so forth have announced they're almost out of storage. So every ship in the Gulf right now, these tankers waiting are being used as floating storage. So basically, they've been booked by cargo owners to take oil and sit there and wait. The reason why, because when you turn off the tap of the crude oil production, it's not that easy to turn on back on. It could take weeks, even months. By the way, you heard this about Venezuela as well. It's not that easy to turn back on and off oil. So I think even after the Straits of Hormuz open, you're looking at my assumption 2 to 8 weeks to build back up to what it was again. So the disruption from an economical perspective should be looked at, I would say, quarter and a half of global disruption, maybe 2 quarters of global disruptions, versus like 5 weeks of global disruption. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Tell me something else. Do you see, maritime traffic picking up from other places like Venezuela to make up for the shortfall in any way?
I think the problem is there's it's not that easy to replace 20% of the crude in the world. So Venezuela hasn't. It's not significant. Okay, it's nice that there are discussions, but even when the U.S. kind of had the agreement with the Venezuelan government, we wrote, and I think all the analysts wrote that it would take months, maybe years, to build back up the production of the Venezuelan fields because it takes time.
What about the United States?
They don't have enough to export that much. They're self-independent, but they're already exporting everything they can. What we
Mhm.
are seeing is a few things. Number one, is the Red Sea. So the Saudi Arabia basically pumps about 10 million barrels a day. They're the biggest. 5 to 7 of these are going to the Red Sea, to Yanbu, which is a port in the Red Sea, which we're seeing a peak of an all-time peak of exports from Yanbu. It's, I think we've usually seen 1 or 2 tankers go there. Right now, there are 64 crude oil tankers. So it's like 30 times up the exports from the Red Sea in Yanbu, which is why the Iranians attacked it 2 or 3 days ago. So that's number one. I think the second thing the U.S. have done, and is fully unprecedented, Michael, in history, it has allowed trade of Russian crude, which is currently at sea, which is about 160 million barrels, mostly destined to China and maybe a bit of Turkey. It's about 250 tankers. So they've allowed every Russian crude at sea on March 12th to be traded, even if they're carried by sanctioned ships, not just by shadow fleet ships. So that's fully unprecedented. So that's to pump 160 million barrels to the world kind of economy. The second is obviously the release of about 400 million barrels from strategic reserves of multiple countries. So that's 400 plus 160, right? That's 560. And there's about 180 million barrels of Iranian oil also on the water. So it's 400 plus 160 plus 180. I think gets you to 740 million barrels, I think, on the water that the US is trying to release. And that is to release the stress in the global economy. I know a lot of our customers are very agitated about touching this Iranian and Russian oil. You're basically telling businesses, we've told you forever not to deal with sanctioned entities. It is okay right now to do this, but only for a month and only with these people and only these ships. So they're very agitated by this. Like, for instance, okay, we're going to buy it. How are we going to pay these people? You can't wire money to, to US dollars to Iranian or Americans, right? The SWIFT doesn't work. There's no SWIFT. So how do you actually do that? So it's very good ideas, but in reality, I think the market is kind of struggling to execute on that still. I'm sure big oil traders will find a way, but it's not a one and done, I think.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, Bitcoin could be it. But again, I'm saying nobody, as far as I know, nobody ever paid $250 million for Bitcoin for crude oil times 250, right? I'm not sure these countries have Bitcoin. I'm not sure you're allowed to get Bitcoin. You need to pay that. So
Tell me something else. When you say they're agitated, these people, what does agitated mean?
it means that this is a very, from the commercial perspective, this is a very new situation that changes, first of all the flows. Second of all, how you run your business. Who are you allowed to do business with? Where do you import? Where do you export? I was in Asia a couple weeks ago, and I've heard that cooking oil in Gujarat was about to run out
Gujarat in India.
in India. Yeah, and I have a team in Bangkok, and I heard they're unable to fuel their cars, for example. And some of my customers tells me, I don't know where can I source oil. They have ships. These ships are not employed. So theoretically, the freight rates are up the roof. Practically, they're not doing any deals. Bunker fuel. You can't fuel your ships because there's not enough supply in Singapore, Cape Town, Rotterdam to make up for the fueling usually do in Fujairah in the UAE. It's a fully interconnected system that is, I think, right now being severely disrupted. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty. And markets, as you know, uncertainty is not very good for markets, especially not for these big deals with big commitments. So banks, for instance, are agitated. Would they finance letter of credit for a $500 million oil deal, right? With an oil deal, so it should be in normal times maybe 200 or 150. Are they going to get paid? Who's going to get pay them? It's very sanctioned entities. You can't block, you can't wire. So there's a whole lot of agitation, all these parts of the supply chain pertaining to the situation right now. And I think my team is right now writing me that just this morning we saw a falsely flagged LPG carrier laden with Iranian LPG signaling it's going to China. So, and going through Iran. So I think we're seeing Iran as of this morning, 20 minutes ago or 40 minutes ago, exporting LPG and oil.
Just explain to our listeners, what is a falsely flagged ship?
To get to a port and trade, you need a few basic. Well, this is becoming very maritime for everybody, huh?
The world is about this. This is affecting everybody in the world right now. It's your moment, hon.
So to trade, a ship needs a flag. You need to be flagged somewhere: Israel, U.S., Germany, Panama, whatever. It is a formal certificate that says this country allowed you to fly their flag. On yachts, you see this all the time. You cannot get into a port without a flag and a certificate of a flag. You cannot. No matter which port, by the way, even out in China. Second is a class society approval. Class society is a yearly check that says you're good to go. So you have to get a class society. And the third is certificate of insurance. Without these three things, no trade, period, full stop. Right? Even not in China, by the way, even not in Russia. Russia, because of the sanctions on Russia and Ukraine, in the Russia-Ukraine war and in Iran, Russia built their own insurance companies because of that, and their own class societies, and flying their own flag. A falsely flagged ship is a ship that says, I have the flag of Cambodia, while actually has the flag of Iran. And if you would have tracked the shadow fleet events across Europe, um, I think the French stopped 2 falsely flagged ships in the last 2 or 3 weeks. It's becoming a big thing. We're tracking it. We're providing it to all our customers. It's not that easy because that means you need to track 1 million ships and exactly which flags they fly at any point in time and which is false, which is it's quite complicated, and it is effectively something illegal to do. So when you do that, that is full basically justification for somebody to stop you. And I think we have been seeing for years now, the same playbook played by Venezuela, Iran, Cuba to some extent, Russia, and effectively most of this oil is going to China. And I think that's part of the big game. I think maybe the U.S. is playing here. Is Iran an isolated event, or is it part of the Venezuela, Cuba, Iran like lever on the Chinese imports of oil, and how should we think about it in this kind of great power competition? I don't know if that makes sense to you.
You wanna explain it a little more?
Yeah, I think in the U.S. eyes, there's if you read the National Defense Strategy published by the United States Department of War, they talk about NDS 2026. They talk about a few main things. One is the Western Hemisphere. They're saying the Western Hemisphere is our home. We need to protect it, which is why you're seeing Venezuela and Cuba, if you will, the Monroe Doctrine. Then they talk about the Arctic as the main artery, and then they talk about China as the main global power that can compete with the U.S. And if you've seen the PLA buildup of ships over the last 10 years, it's been insane. And I think the U.S. is also talking about the U.S. industrial base and the shipbuilding industrial base, because the in the pace China is, if the U.S. doesn't change the trajectory of maritime assets, um, if in 5 years' time, China might have 20 to 50 times more assets than the U.S. at sea. So that's part of the industrial base. So in the definition national defense strategy, you're thinking about that great power competition between China and the U.S., where Russia is predominantly a European problem, which is why we're seeing this bifurcation of policy, where France, 2 days ago, President Macron says we've stopped these shadow fleet vessels with the Russian oil. We're not going to let it be. However, actually, price of oil went to $120 a barrel, and the price cap on Russia, which is the limitation of Russia to export oil, is $60 a barrel, right? So today, you can buy Russian oil for obviously $100 in the free market and not violate sanctions. So effectively, the war with Iran completely freed up all of Russia's oil trade as an unintended consequence, 100%, and double their revenue. So if you think from a European perspective, that's a big problem. Maybe from a US perspective, if you think about China as a great power competition, clamping down on Iranian Venezuela oil right now, in the longer term, is maybe a good thing and a good lever against China, maybe to prevent war with China, because I think their policy of um, peace through strength is exactly, okay, I think, in tune with that. What are your levers in peacetime you can draw upon from strengthened position to prevent, I think, war? I think that's the way to think about it.
I think part of that is because a large percentage of the oil that China imports comes from Iran.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Of course.
so
Most of the Iranian exports of oil are to China.
right. And so, I think it's 80% of Iranian oil goes to
80%.
China? What?
Yeah, I think it's 80%. Yeah,
Okay.
80% ish. Yeah.
You're right in your most recent reports, over the past 7 days, 23 million barrels of oil, crude oil,
Yep.
departed the Gulf. Iran loaded 8 million barrels, mostly through Carg, in the past 7 days, which is quite striking. Carg is the main financial arm of the IRGC, the regime in Tehran, and yet they still managed to load 8 million barrels. And your assumption is they managed to get that out by going through Iranian territorial waters close to the Iranian coast?
Yeah, I think it's, yes, but I think it's all known fact. So the very delicate balance, I think, the United States and its allies are managing here, to my humble opinion. I'm not saying this out of like personal knowledge of what they tell me, just my general assessment of the situation is, you have almost competing priorities here. One is the war with Iran and the goals that President Trump put for the war with Iran, and the second is the world economy. And they're almost competing priorities. So I think what they're trying to do is a very delicate balance between these two. I think they're allowing Iran to keep on exporting, because, as I said, when the U.S. said on Venezuela, "You're not going to export," effectively, they've commenced very impressive maritime operations by the Coast Guard and U.S. Navy across the Atlantic, across Venezuela, effectively stopping Venezuelan exports. I am sure, because of the Straits of Hormuz, they can do this to Iran if they choose to do that. Okay, and I'm 100% sure. There's no chance they can do it across a whole ocean without any buildup, and not do it on the Strait of Hormuz with like one of the biggest buildups that we've seen in the recent years. So these exports from Carg Island makes a lot of sense to me. because they decided not to stop it and decided to allow trade in Iranian crude oil, which is sanctioned, and Russian crude, which I gave you the math previously, then of course they will allow it, the exports from Kark, right? That makes sense. Because otherwise, how would they export if you take out Kark?
I want to go back to Yanbu 1 second because I think this is an underreported story. So just to set up the facts, the Saudis mostly export their oil via the Straits of Hormuz and their northern ports. But they've transferred this on the east-west pipeline that goes to the southwestern port at Yanbu. And what you see actually, if you look at the maps that Windward develops, is you've seen actually tankers making U-turns in the middle of the Arabian Sea, basically. And instead of going north to the Straits of Hormuz from the east, they make a U-turn and they're going a little further west and then going north through the Red Sea around Bab el Mandeb, uh, right on the Somali coastline, and then straight up to the Red Sea, where they then um, dock at Yanbu. The Saudis are now, it seems like, delivering about 5 million barrels a day to Yanbu, and then those ships take that oil and go north through the Suez Canal and out to the Mediterranean. How long-term policy is this? How exposed is this to Iran and the Houthis? And could this to be disrupted as well in the Red Sea by these rogue terrorist operations in Iran?
Oh, it's a big question. I think the major issue here is the Houthis, because I think it's for Iran. Yanbu is a relatively small area. I'm sure the U.S. and its allies, and if they choose to protect Yanbu, because it's a very focused place, you can do it. It's not the whole of Saudi Arabia. It's just like a port. So we're seeing in Israel, and we've had some very unfortunate and tough events tonight. But by and large, from a statistical perspective, I think the population in Israel, we've seen very little casualties over 3 weeks of war, which means the defense systems work extremely well. And it's not 100%. And of course, like every person is a whole world. So I think it's relatively easy to protect Yanbu from like drones or ballistic missiles in the grand scheme of things. However, the main issue is you need to go through the Red Sea to do it. And the Houthis have not joined the fight yet. But if they join the fight and say, we're going to attack every ship that's going to export oil from Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, obviously they have never done, that would be extremely big, I think. But we have not seen that yet. And it's really not clear to me, really, the policy here by Iran or the Houthis or anybody else. Are they attacking Saudi exports, or are they attacking US, or vice versa? They said one, they did the opposite. So I don't know if I have consistency in my brain about what they're trying to achieve. But if they say our lever is not just closing the Straits of Hormuz, it's closing oil exports from Saudi Arabia, which they haven't said it yet, and I don't think the Houthis said it yet, then the Houthis are a big threat because of their proximity to the Bab el-Mandeb and to Djibouti and the Red Sea. And absolutely they can attack, and they've proven they can attack and are able and qualified to attack ships there. And I think because U.S. Navy ships are focused in Straits of Hormuz, and that's not a well-known fact, but the European countries have about a big issue with missile interception. Without naming names, a lot of the European navies haven't fully operationalized their anti-ballistic missile weapons on ships.
You're saying something quite extraordinary right now, which is when President Trump calls on the European nations, who are most affected, by the way, them and Southeast Asian countries, by the shutting of the Straits of Hormuz, and he calls on them to help open the straits. What you're basically saying is their navies can't actually help. Is that what you're saying?
First of all, I was talking about the Red Sea, and the Houthis and ballistic missiles. I think that is a
Right.
limited type of protection they can offer based on what I've seen in the last 2 years, but maybe change it. They haven't announced it. Number one. Number two, I actually think they can help open the Straits of Hormuz. I think the UK, for example, has a lot of minesweepers and is able, and France has a lot of minesweepers and able. I don't think, I'm not under the impression that opening the Straits of Hormuz by the Europeans is impossible. I'm hearing from them they're not willing to do that yet. Okay, but I don't actually Straits of Hormuz. I think they can absolutely be helpful. I was talking about convoys in the Red Sea, and I'm sorry about the nuance, but it's not a nuance. It's like 1,000 kilometers apart. But I think having Europe protect convoys from ballistic missiles is a big operational challenge. All I'm saying is there's a few very hard steps to go if the Iran and its allies choose to do what you just hypothesized and disrupt exports from Yanbu, which is about again 5 or 7 million barrels a day, by the Houthis. It is not that easy to counter it. That's what I'm saying.
Why do you think the Europeans don't wanna help open the Straits of Hormuz?
It's a geopolitical question. I don't know. A lot of them are my customers, and I'm not in the know. If you ask my humble opinion without prior knowledge, I think that there is an end game where the U.S. and maybe Israel say, "We've achieved everything we wanted. Thank you very much. Goodbye." Um, and and Iran "Okay, we're not going to allow exports to the U.S. and Israel from the Gulf," which actually, by the way, don't exist. Nobody exports from Israel and the Gulf to U.S. or Israel, to the U.S. or Israel. So I think if the Europeans step in right now, then it takes strategically that end game off the table. And that's actually a very plausible end game in my view. So as long as they're not actively involved in fighting NATO or the UK or the EU, that is a plausible end game. Which is, I think that's why I heard them say, "We're happy to escort ships after a ceasefire." So I think what I heard the European countries say actually plays out to that end game quite well. Because I can I think the other end games, Michael, to be honest, are way more excessive in terms of impacts of the on the US economy and the European and the global economy. Way more excessive. So I actually think this is a plausible end game. But again, I'm not into war games and nobody's asking my opinion, right?
Uh, I just did. But,
Yeah.
um, Iran played this card now, the Straits of Hormuz, after threatening for 40 years. It's obviously been massively disruptive. Probably don't get to play that card a second time. The world now knows that you'll go scorched earth and do this. So that card is probably now off the table, for the future. Um, Number 1, do you think that's true?
No.
Uh, you don't think that's true? Okay.
No.
And I'd love to hear why. And number 2, if you're the commander of the world's navy or world's economy now, what would you do in the Straits of Hormuz?
Okay, so the reason I don't think they can't play that card again, because there's always another way to disrupt it. So maybe not unmanned surface vehicles, maybe midget submarines, maybe mines, but I think actually the opposite, if anything, Michael. It was just proven to be extremely effective. So everything we read in the last 40 years about this scenario happening, I don't think it's that easy to roll that back, I think. And
Mhm.
and I've spoken to some ex-UK and US and so forth Navy officer. They told me they've been preparing for this, but I haven't really seen anything of their preparations kind of come to bear, to be honest, yet. None of us have. Maybe it will be. I don't know. I'm not in the know. So I actually think they will do that. And if anything, it's not just that, right? You could also attack all the energy facilities in the area, and why not? That's also pretty effective, right? Attack Yanbu, attack Qatar, attack, I think that's what we're seeing. It's pretty effective. Dubai, flights from Europe to the east, flying to Asia tonight are like 5 times more expensive right now because of fuel, but also because you can't go there. And Dubai, there's no flights. In Qatar, there's no flights. So it's become a big hub, which effectively, I think it shows they have asymmetric power on the world economy. With some cheap drones and missiles, they can do a lot. You actually don't need a nuclear weapon. You need much less to make this big of an impact. And it's much less worse in the eyes of the global economy to use that than a nuclear weapon. So if anything, I just think this is like game on, way to their appetite. If I were on the other side, that's one comment. Second comment on how they open the Straits of Hormuz. It's a tough one. You either go full on scorched earth and conquer South Iran, or I think you can't. You need to go to diplomacy. I honestly think from what I know in the world and everything I've seen, the middle ground is not there.
So, basically, what you're arguing is because you think the sense in diplomacy, which is kind of the comment you made about the Europeans earlier, uh, you basically have a ticking time bomb called the Straits of Hormuz for eternity,
Unless you change the regime in Iran.
unless you change the regime in Iran.
Yeah. I think we've been having this time bomb for 45 years. It just went off right now.
Right.
It didn't go off until 3 weeks ago, but it's the same time bomb. It's geography. By the way, let me give you another example. Suez Canal. Okay. Let's assume somebody else is not Egypt. It's a bad regime in Egypt, and they say, we close Suez Canal for everybody who's not whatever. The U.S. acquired a lot of assets in the Panama Canal from the Hutchison Group because they didn't want China to be involved in the choke point in Panama. The president is talking about Greenland. So the geography is something you need to come to terms with. You can't change the geography. Singapore obviously is a very amazing nation, you know, top of the line. friendly with everybody, but they're in the Singapore Straits. Is there a scenario that somebody sometimes closes the Straits of Malacca? Yes. So geography is geography. So yeah, I don't think you can diffuse this ticking bomb.
So demographics is destiny and geography is destiny in that case. You better be sure there's a good regime in charge, if you wanna keep global trade open, particularly
Or,
over the
or,
coming
or,
decade.
or, you know, or do it in some other way. That's kind of beyond my pay grade. But my honest opinion from the maritime perspective, I don't think you can ensure that somebody is never going to disrupt that. You just need one mine, or one midget submarine once, and think what we're seeing kind of narco submarines and the sophistication of that in Venezuela and in the Western Hemisphere. And you're seeing like super high sophistication. You'd have it once, yeah, blow up one shit once, right? And then it's closed again. So
Yeah.
so you don't need to make it happen all the time, just once in 5 years and done. Actually, that's what we're seeing. Because people think that there's mines in the middle, then they're going to the very close to the shores, which you're not supposed to do. Which is, by the way, also an oil spill challenge. It's if you have an oil spill in the Straits of Hormuz, it's going to be very bad.
In your view, before I get to my last 2 questions, in your view, is there any way to actually get more ships out of the Straits of Hormuz now in some alternative lane?
No.
Okay. You talked a lot about energy. Talk to me about the other products that we talked about there, which is fertilizers and phosphates, ammonia and aluminum and
Yep.
steel. From your maritime perspective, where do you already see like changing global trade and what's it
All of
affect?
it. All of it is already changing. All of it. 100% of it is already changing. 100%. Steel mills in Turkey and China are, like, I think, doubling down on steel production because the UAE can provide, because obviously they can get ships out. Fertilizers are up in price about 60%, which is going to impact, by the way, mostly developing countries, because countries like Israel who needs fertilizers, or like Europe and so forth, somebody will pay up. At the end of the day, the consumers, something will cost more. Your bananas or your tomatoes will cost 50% more. And I'm sure you and me, Michael, our kids will still have food on the table. Maybe we'll go to one less vacation a year. But if you're in a developing country and you can't buy fertilizers, that's not going to end well, my friend. You're not going to have any crops, which means you're not going to have any food, which means there's going to be famine. So I think actually the big hit is for the developing countries in the grand scheme of things. The developed countries will have higher inflation. I think we're already seeing like defense saying this and Japan saying this and other people saying this, but it's quite obvious, I think. So you're going to see higher inflation. Gas prices in Europe are 5 times higher right now. So I think it's a big impact right now. Because again, I live in the UK. My gas bill is like 100, 150 pounds a month, I think, which is pretty high just for heating. Is it going to make be 500? I'll live. But if you take, 500, 600, 700 pounds from the average Joe, it's a lot. So that really the impact is on the uh, um, weaker parts of society and developing countries. And we've seen, by the way, the U.S. growth this year has been K-shaped, really. So a lot of the hyper rich have like pulled up. And the question is there a secondary impact on AI companies' investments? We haven't spoken about that, but if
Yeah.
the Saudi money, Qatari money, UAE money is going to rebuild their economies and rebuild their defense, are they really going to put in money into US AI companies, and what's the impact of that on Wall Street? I think it's a legitimate question.
Before the last question, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to do this with us. And again, one more question before that last question. Do you see a shifting pattern where all of a sudden ships that might have gone to developing countries are now going to developed countries because they can get a better price? Do you see that in your shipping patterns?
Uh, I think it's shipping is driven by cargo flows.
Mhm.
So I think we're starting to see the highest bidder getting more, and that highest bidder, the importer, yes, is developed countries.
Mhm.
I think it's still pretty early, but yes, fertilizer I already seeing going more to developed than developing countries.
Mhm.
Yes, and so does jet fuel and oil products. And I think you didn't ask, but I think that the main question you didn't ask about, and I think it's two last things super important. One is, what does this do to the Russia war in Europe? I think it actually fuels Russia to win much more.
Mhm.
I think it makes the ceasefire much farther away because Putin has double the money to invest.
Mhm.
Yeah. So if the sanctions of global economy has kind of shrank the Russian economy and threatened kind of the viability of it over time, over a long period. I think now it's just gone,
Mhm.
right? And I don't think my humble assessment is crude oil is not going to go to less than digits this year. And I think that kind of makes Russian oil to be fully traded and fully there. Which I think threatens Europe a lot. So this kind of accelerates the bifurcation of the world. Last thing we didn't speak about is Cuba, which I think is almost falling right now. There's a second week of blackout in Cuba. There's almost no crude exports. It's almost a blockade. I don't think it's a formal blockade, but we've seen the traffic and imports to Cuba drop like 90 something percent. So effectively, nobody's trading with Cuba right now. And I think this is all like we're seeing the world shift kind of in front of our eyes. Where does it end, and what are the second and third order impacts on Taiwan and China, on Indian approach, on the European approach, on the U.S. approach, and the Middle East? I don't know, but I think there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, I've been saying on my TV interviews that this was a compounding problem that somebody needed to take aim at, and imagine Iran 6 months from now protected with, nuclear weapon or whatever it was, or 11 what would happen in the Straits of Hormuz then or to global trade. But before we finish, impossible to know, right? But it was definitely a compounding problem that should have been nipped in the bud probably 47 years ago, not today. Um, I wanna finish with one last thing. Our listeners probably don't know this, but, Ami is a former naval officer, and his ship was hit,
Yep.
by a missile,
Iranian itself.
by an Iranian missile. And I wanna ask you how you think about both the current conflict generally, as someone who's gone through that experience, and number 2, how would you feel today as a naval officer having to navigate this issue in and around the Straits of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman? And what would you say to somebody currently serving on those ships?
Okay, so it feels very bad, and I think, by the way, we didn't talk about the loss of life, but we have a lot of seafarers that lost their lives, and they're like are lost at sea, and they're just civilians trading, right? That they have nothing to do with fighting, so they're not supposed to die. I think, and I think it's a big tragedy which we should recognize. So I think it feels very bad. It's extremely surprising, and I think it's also quite hard, and I think there may be more casualties at sea. I think it's a pretty tough situation to be at, and it's the first time we're seeing the commercial space of like trading and shipping kind of fully converge with the naval space. We've seen this a bit in the shadow fleet, but not this much. So I'm not sure. I think it's a big challenge both in navies, but also in governments worldwide. Does everybody figure out these two things at the same time? Because militaries do like let's kill people, let's defend our people, and governments do policy. But this is kind of something that merges that in the middle. So I think a lot of these Navy officers would feel they're not fully equipped to deal with the second, third order consequences. I think the scale with all the Gulf partners kind of puts the Gulf partners in the U.S. and Israel maybe on one side and maybe Iran on another side. And I think that's very challenging for them. At the same time, I think this is what they've been training for. So it's a moment of purpose, if you will. Um, all these exercises, all these years, this is the money time, right? This is what you're supposed to do. If you read the charter of the U.S. Navy, I think a lot of it's talking about freedom of the season and enabling and making sure global trade is free. So this is their moment in the sun, right?
All right. Any personal words to people that manning the U.S. or Israeli naval ships?
Yeah, bravo Zulu, guys. Go Navy. You can do this. This is our moment in the sun. We're all one community.
Ami Daniel, thank you so much. If you've enjoyed, I'm actually going to have you back, by the way, to do like a full maritime scope on geography. So please prepare yourself and get ready.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah,
I'll try.
yeah,
I'll try.
it's the next guest. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can get more of Invested in Ami Daniel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.